Welcome back to my channel. After my busy days, how do you relax? You find a comfortable position, let your body settle, and allow your mind to drift gently. Two places most people preferred not to see, behind the tall brick walls and barred windows of the Victorian Asylum. Places once called madhouses or lunatic hospitals. Institutions meant to help and sometimes to hide. You won't need to do anything, simply listen and let your imagination follow the rhythm of quiet words. Like mist over a quiet landscape, you're about to take a journey. Then we'll walk alongside a woman who risked everything to reveal its secrets. We'll examine the mystery of lost records, lost lives, and forgotten names. Finally, we'll visit the other side of the door, the administrator's dining rooms where soft linens, good wine, and polite conversation existed just a few halls away from desperation. It's not one of excitement or urgency, but one of observation, quiet immersion, and slow, thoughtful exploration. Tonight, we'll step softly into the forgotten corridors of the 19th century. We'll begin with what it was really like, to be an ordinary patient in such a place. It is 1847, and you are Charles, an undercover inspector for the English government, sent to investigate conditions at one of the country's many asylums. You wear plain clothes, a dark suit, a white shirt, a cravat at your neck. Your demeanor is placid. You have come to observe, record, report. The first thing you notice is the smell. Carbolic soap, stale urine, sickness. You pass through the high iron gates and climb the long path toward the front door. Behind you, the sounds of the outside world recede. Ahead, the stillness presses in. It is absolute stillness, punctuated only by the distant cries of patients. At the top of the path, you pause. Before you is a sober brick building set in a vast empty landscape. To either side, a pair of wings. Each window is barred. Each window is blank. You reach out, touch the cold, smooth glass. Beyond, a glimpse of movement, a shadow, a sigh. You step inside. A long, low room, dimly lit, smelling faintly of damp and decay. You hear a crash in the distance, a scream, closer now, the whisper of voices, the scrape of metal. You follow the sound down a corridor. To your left, a door-marked bathroom, above another female servants. Before you, open a bright light. You look up, squinting. The sun streams through a high window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. Through the far door comes the sound of raised voices, clanging metal. You push open the door, cross the threshold, and enter the workshop. Inside, men and women in coarse clothes sit at long tables, mending clothes, polishing shoes, weaving baskets. They are bent, their heads close to their work. You watch for a moment, then turn away. In the corner, a woman sits still, rocking slightly. Her head is tilted back, her mouth open. She sings or chants in a low voice. You move closer. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, Mary went, Mary went. Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. The woman stops. She looks up, eyes blank. You start back. You look away, feeling suddenly ashamed. You turn and leave the workshop. Outside, the cries of children. You follow the sound, passing doors marked male patients, infirmary, dark room. Now the sound of laughter, singing, the scrape of chairs on stone. You push open the door and enter the day room. In the center, a large table piled with books and papers. On the walls, charts and diagrams. Around the table, a dozen or so patients, some seated, some standing, reading aloud from a book. Their voices are soft but clear. You listen for a moment, when the heart is full of sorrow. Sorrow. When the heart is full of sorrow, let it flow. Let it flow. When the heart is full of sorrow, let it flow and overflow. The reader pauses, looks up. The others fall silent. He continues, his voice cracking slightly. For all the night is dark and tedious, tedious. For all the night is dark and tedious, the day is long and slow. For all the night is dark and tedious, the day is long and slow, and God alone can make it shorter, shorter. And God alone can make it shorter, shorter, and God alone can make it shorter. The man closes the book. The others stir. They look up, their eyes blank, their smiles empty. You feel a hand on your arm. Startled, you look down. A young woman, her face pale, her hair tangled. "Come," she whispers urgently, pulling you toward the door. "Don't listen, don't listen." She pulls you out into the corridor. "They'll fill your head with their sadness. You won't get out. You won't get out." You pull free. "Thank you," you say softly, stepping back into the room. The woman is gone. You are alone. The door closes behind you and the lock clicks shut. Do you ever feel like you're living in a story? Like you're inside a book or a movie and someone else is writing the plot? Well, let me tell you about a place where fiction blurs with reality, where the lines between sane and insane are thinner than you might think. Now, Blackwell's Island might sound like a place from a nightmare, and you'd be right. But her greatest story was about to begin. Bly was determined to expose the dark secrets hidden within the walls of Blackwell's Island. So she did what any good reporter would do. She went undercover. You see, the staff at Blackwell's Island had operated for years without oversight or accountability. We'll explore the hidden histories that have been lost to time and bring you face to face with the mysteries that still linger today. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and get ready to dive into the unknown. They had become so used to doing things their way that they didn't care what anyone thought of them. But now they had a choice: continue operating as usual or face the consequences of exposure. She checked into a rundown boarding house nearby and started acting strangely. At first, it was subtle. She stopped bathing, wore the same clothes for days, and refused to eat regular food. But as the days passed, she became more erratic, pacing the floor and talking to herself. Her landlady, growing increasingly alarmed, decided to call the police. It was an island in the East River, right off the coast of New York City. The officers arrived, and after a brief examination, they declared her insane. Here she spent 10 days as a patient without friends or family to visit her. She observed the conditions, talked to the other patients, and made notes on everything she saw and heard. When she was finally released, she wrote a series of articles detailing her experiences. Her story shocked the nation. People couldn't believe that such terrible conditions existed in a place meant to help the sick. They bundled her into a carriage and took her to Bellevue Hospital, where a panel of doctors confirmed what the police had already decided. She was crazy. But Bly had a secret. She wasn't acting. She was exposing. The doctors failed to notice that she was a reporter from the New York World who had gone undercover to investigate the asylum system. And in the late 1800s, it became notorious as the final destination for hundreds of unsuspecting women. You see, these women weren't criminals or witches. They were ordinary people who got swept up in a terrifying game of cat and mouse with the most cunning reporter of her time. It's the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum for Women. Her name was Nellie Bly. She had a nose for news and a talent for landing the biggest scoops in New York City. And that's when everything changed. After a brief stay at Bellevue, she was transferred to the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum for Women. But despite the outcry, things didn't change much. Join us next time as we continue our journey into the forgotten past and uncover the secrets that even Nellie Bly could unbring to light. When you enter a museum devoted to the history of mental health care, you probably expect to find padded walls and straitjackets. When you actually see them, those things might come as a surprise. But here I want to focus on something else. At the center of this room sits a row of computers, each offering access to an online archive. As I scan through the records, I am struck by how familiar these pages look. That's the case with the archives of the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, which operated for 900 years. Problem solved. Now I began combing through the records of the patients, noting the dates of their arrival and their disposal status. And it was during this process that I learned about the gaps in the narrative. So if you're interested in learning more about the patients of Bedlam, please visit the website. What I have learned during this project is that there are gaps in the narrative of our ancestors' lives. But those gaps don't represent the end of the story. Each blank page or faded ink blotch is an opportunity to dig deeper, to uncover new information about the past. And maybe that's why I enjoy doing this work so much. Every time I hit a brick wall, I know that the solution is out there waiting to be discovered. And uncovering the truth allows me to connect with my ancestors in a whole new way. After all, it was their experiences, both positive and negative, that shaped who they were. And it's up to us to honor that legacy.
Wow,
The handwritten pages offered insights into the quality of their care. During World War I, the Bethlehem Royal Hospital faced severe staff shortages, especially among its nurses. Volunteers stepped in to replace them, but morale was low and conditions were dire. One entry caught my eye. It described a patient who was having violent mood swings and was prescribed baths to calm her down. The next entry noted that she had drowned in her bath. Her disposal date, March 1915, and it wasn't the only case of its kind. Several patients had died in similar circumstances. But the handwritten notes made it clear that the staff didn't record the disposal status immediately. Instead, they waited until the end of the year. And that brings me to the final gap in the narrative: accessibility. Today, researchers can search a digital database of patients held between 1842 and 1930, but the names are hidden behind reference numbers. The United States, for example, requires that individuals wait 75 years after their death before their medical records are made public. Other countries offer varying degrees of privacy. For example, Australia protects the privacy of living individuals but makes other records public after 100 years. And some records are just plain hard to find. Throughout history, organizations like hospitals and prisons have routinely destroyed or misplaced records. Bethlehem Royal Hospital, for example, moved locations more than a dozen times throughout the 19th century, and each move created new opportunities for things to get lost or broken. I spent hours poring through boxes of brittle records, trying to find the diaries of former patients. But once I realized that the diaries were unlikely to exist, I shifted my focus to something more practical: the handwritten indexes. As I pored through hundreds of yellowed pages, I continued to piece together the narrative of each individual. Sometimes I encountered a wall of indecipherable handwriting. Sometimes I found a faded ink blotch where a name once stood. And sometimes I discovered a completely blank page. Each blank page represented an opportunity to do more research. And that S when I decided to launch a website where I could share what I learned with anyone who's interested. And although we can search by year of birth, there are no records of when someone died. Fortunately, I discovered that the hospital keeps its registers on site, but getting access to them requires an appointment. So I sent an email asking for permission to view the records. I waited 2 weeks and then sent a follow-up. 2 more weeks passed before I received a denial. I won't bore you with the details, but it took months of back and forth before I finally received permission to view the records. Eventually, I stood in a room surrounded by hundreds of boxes filled with fragile documents, and as I carefully scanned the entries, I noticed that some boxes contained entire volumes of records, while others had gaps, such as the years 1914, 1915, and 1916. Where are these records? I asked the archivist. She shrugged. Disposal. So I looked up the word disposal in the index and found the answer. Each volume contained a separate set of records for patients admitted during a particular time frame, and some of those time frames spanned more than a year. But once I realized that the records were missing, I could begin searching for them. And that's when I stumbled upon the greatest treasure of the collection: a card file containing handwritten notes about each of the 3 missing volumes. With a little bit of work, I was able to piece together the entire story of each patient. Sometimes the handwriting was difficult to decipher, sometimes a page was missing a few names, and sometimes I couldn't find a record at all, but I was making progress. Then I came across this entry. Read, "See previous volume, page 13. I flipped to the previous volume and found the next set of handwritten pages. But page 13 had been ripped out. Now I was stumped. Was there any way to fill in these gaps? The answer turned out to be simple. I just needed to keep looking. They are laid out like a spreadsheet, all crisp fonts and columns of data. There are names and ages and diagnosis and length of stay. There's even a column for occupation. And then there's this line at the bottom that reads, disposal status. I click on it, and the term stops me in my tracks. It reads, disposal date, a euphemism for the day a patient died. But this is only one of the ways we can discover when someone died. As a historian, I look for clues in wills and obituaries and gravestones. But each of these sources leaves gaps in the narrative. And today, we are going to talk about them. About the challenges of researching our ancestors' deaths, why they died, and how we can use that knowledge to teach us about our family history and ourselves. So let's start with why we are talking about this topic today. I run a social media account and channel where I share what I learn about family history. I make resources to help others get started with their research, and I tell stories about the people I discover in my own tree. And I got to thinking about death because every week when I make a post about a deceased ancestor, I receive criticism. People will say things like, "You should only post positive things," or "I don't want to hear about your dead relatives." And while I respect that, I think these people are missing the point. Our ancestors didn't just live. They also loved and lost. They laughed and cried. They succeeded and struggled. Understanding their entire story, not just the highlights, helps us understand ourselves better. But what do I mean when I say that there are gaps in the narrative? One issue is that the records don't always tell us when our ancestors died. Take, for example, the records for the Philadelphia workhouse, which operated as a prison. It's a homeless shelter and a hospital, first for the poor and later for the sick and dying. Like other facilities of its kind, it did not always record when someone died. It would list their admission and their occupation and whether or not they were married, but it would rarely record their disposal status. So if we want to learn when our ancestors died, we need to find another source. Another problem is that sometimes the records do tell us when our ancestors died, but we can't actually access those records. As I combed through the remaining records, I eventually found a complete list of the patients for 1914, along with the number of the box where their files were stored. Some of the most important records for understanding our ancestors' lives are also the hardest to access. That's because some records are still private, and here we are. I have posted almost 400 records since I launched the site, and I'm just getting started. All right, now close your eyes. Imagine you're in a dark room. All you can hear is the crackle of a fire and the murmur of many voices. Who's them? They're the ones making the decisions. The asylum administrators, the board members, the physicians. Who are you? You're the patient. How much money the asylum got? How much each patient cost? What kind of food each patient got? How much did a patient cost? In total, the cost of an inmate depended on where you lived. Did they ever wonder why someone would call a place like this home? Did they ever look beyond the potential? We don't know, but we can imagine. If you lived in London, it cost at least £25 per person per year. If you lived somewhere else, it only cost about £8 per person per year. Do you remember the price of bread at the beginning of the story? It cost about 2 shillings and 3 pence a week, so you can do the math. This is their story. You're the one in the padded cell or the straitjacket. You're the one with the potential. You're the ones running the asylum. And this is their story. They're talking about you, about what to do with you. They say things like, "How intractable," and then a long pause, and then someone says, "Let him rot." And then another voice says, "No, he has potential, I think." What does that mean? Potential you don't know? Neither of them know. But then they're talking about money, about how much everything costs, how much it costs to keep you here, to keep all of us here. They were talking about padded cells and straitjackets, and whether or not the place would run better if it were closer to the ground. Like a farm, a big farm with lots of land and fields and maybe some animals. But mostly you hear the word potential, 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 potential. It's hard to hear because there's a closed door between you and them. It's a thick, heavy door with a keyhole in the center. Every asylum was run by people who had very little contact with the patients, though they made all the major decisions. They met in rooms far removed from the patients. Rooms with polished floors and oil paintings and linen tablecloth. They ate dinner together. It was a ritual. It was a time to talk about new ideas and old problems and recent patients. Sometimes they invited an inspector to join them for dinner. He would sit in the best chair and listen to their conversation and take notes. His job was to make sure that the asylum was being run properly. Did they ever wonder what it was like to be a patient? And now we return to the present. Gently, slowly, letting the weight of history rest where it belongs, behind us. You've walked through corridors most never enter. You've shared the air, the silence, and the sorrow of those who were kept apart. You've listened to the story of a brave young reporter. You uncovered mysteries lost to time, and you dined, if only briefly, among those who once held the keys. Victorian asylums were many things. Institutions of care, of cruelty, of confusion. They were built with hope, run with rules, and remembered now with questions. but perhaps in understanding them, not just the headlines, but the dust. In the detail, we offer a quiet kind of justice, a remembering of those whose names were written in water. So rest now, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift like pages in an old ledger. History has much to teach us, but it does so best when we listen softly. Good night.